My question is about the American media. And I'd be interested in the views of the panelists on this. It seems to me that the American media covers relations between the U.S. and Russia with a level of hostility that is left over, I guess, from decades ago. They don't seem to appreciate, for example, the cultural aspect of Russian life, as was just pointed out by your wonderful remarks at the end there about respect and other aspects of cultural differences between us. So it seems to me that there's a great deal of hostility and also naivete in the American media. I wondered if you share that opinion, or
thank you very much.
What do you think about that?
I absolutely agree. Having been a journalist myself most of my life, but I do find it true that there's not really a great understanding or comprehension of Russian history, civilization, and culture, and so they're still in the Cold War mentality. I think a lot of them. I mean, not all, of course.
I would like to say that, of course, Harley, I agree with you 100%. I've been pretty angry about this, and it's been so selective also. Their choice of things is so selective. They seem to concentrate on the negative all the time instead of noticing the positive. And that was certainly true about Sochi. And it is annoying. And one of the things, for instance, here is one of the most important things that's happened in Russia in the last 20 years, has been the return to the religion and to the religion of their ancestors, that is Orthodoxy. And as I say, with the poll in the Christian Science Monitor reported that this independent poll now reports that Russians are the most God-believing country in Europe, and also that 2/3 of the country are Orthodox. Religion is now taught in every school. Now, that to me is a very important fact, but nobody has ever written about that in the newspapers. All they talk about is how slow, how bad, how Russia's always doing bad things or not succeeding or whatever. To me, it is quite astonishing that that country, which we used to call godless communism, in 20 years has become the most God-believing country in Europe. That's an important fact. And that's just one example of many things that are not covered and should be covered. If I were doing it, I'd have a lot of things to cover. And I'm really very sorry. I don't know why this is happening, but there is real antipathy, hostility, often toward Russia. I know that when I wrote Land of the Firebird, I was so attacked by the New York Times that I thought I'd never be able to write a book again. And that book has now been in print for 35 years, is in colleges and universities, in the hands of tourists and everything else. But so there is hostility, and it's still going on.
I'll just add a quick, I agree with everything that's been said. Let's remember that Mark Twain is reputed to have said that wars happen so that Americans will learn their geography.
I love that.
Now, I don't know if that's apocryphal or not, but it struck me that many of the television people were struggling with Crimea, how to pronounce it, not to mention where to find it. And of course, there's just been a Pew study on Americans' knowledge of geography, which is pretty depressing. So I'm afraid that I have great respect for the Fourth Estate. I wish they would do a better job. There is good reporting that you can find if you dig for it. And that's the way nowadays we have to get our news. You just can't depend on what's broadcast. Thank you.
Well, as I said, the Cold War is over, but the Cold War mindset is not, and that certainly is true of the media as well. Unfortunately, also including the Russian media when they write about the U.S. So there's a lot of work to be done on both sides.
Thank you. We have a question on the right.
Yes, thank you, Anton. Panelists, very humbled and honored to hear your perspectives today, your very high level of experience in this historic era. I was a young
Would
student.
you please identify yourself?
Yes, I'm sorry, George Segalis. I was a young student here at American University in the 80s and actually ended up at 22 years old being a young press secretary for the Reagan administration. Very honored and had a tremendous experience. I wasn't high level, but I worked for a lot of notable people, so wonderful to hear your experiences today. Quick anecdote and your response. I did meet Mr. Gorbachev on a number of occasions and interpreted through our friend Pavel. And the last time I met him, which was in the late 90s, I asked him many years after Reykjavik, which, as you know, the sticking point was Star Wars and the Strategic Defense Initiative. And I wanted to ask Mr. Gorbachev personally, face to face, many years later, after the decade of the 80s, what he still thought about Star Wars. Was it the sticking point? Was it the personal, if you will, almost animosity over the issue? And I had great respect for the man, still do. He did look visibly perturbed, if you will, when he answered this question and went on to quite explain in a long dissertation, if you will, to me about how both sides, both superpowers, should not have and still should not put any effort into any kind of strategic defense initiative in the future. So I just wanted to kind of hear your opinion, perhaps, on the issue.
No, he still believes that it was right of him not to accept what actually the U.S. side was proposing, because what was being proposed is that there is a pause of 10 years, that the ABM, that there would be a period of non-withdrawal from the ABM treaty for 10 years, after which the U.S. has a right to withdraw and deploy. He could not agree with that, as simple as that. So, no, he is not perturbed by that, and he is still very much a believer in the position that he took at that time. I think it was the right position because the way it was at least presented to us in Reykjavik, and I remember that very well because I actually wrote out the translation of some working documents that were being proposed on the Soviet side and then on the US side. No, that was a non-starter, asking the Soviet Union to agree to the deployment of Star Wars in 10 years, in 10 years' time? No.
Madison, is that it? Would you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, I'm Madison Davis. I'm a student at American University. And my question for the panel is about personalities and the role of personalities in negotiations. Specifically, when they didn't get along, what did they do to work past that?
First of all, I think the most difficult negotiations are usually the ones with your own side.
Yeah.
Negotiations don't take place just across the table. They take place in several dimensions, and there's also the question of the Congress as well. So personalities do matter, but the substance also matters. It's a very complex combination, and you have to dial all the numbers and hit the right combination.
Just one thing, though. I think Reagan and Gorbachev took a liking to each other right away.
They did.
They just liked each other, and they trust. I think they built up a trust that was very important. But
Well,
the biggest problem that Schultz has was with Cap Weinberger. I mean, that is what really, that was more substantive than personality.
Well, that was my experience as well, is to see that just what John says is correct. But one thing, I happen to teach Reagan that proverb, trust but verify, which I'm so happy now to see passing into the American lexicon as if it were always ours. It isn't. It's an old Russian proverb, and Reagan just loved it, and now it's become his, which I like very much. But I really think that the most important thing in any negotiations, no matter how difficult they are, the other side has to feel that you know something about where they're coming from and that you allow them to come from there, even if you don't agree. You don't have to agree. Trust does not necessarily mean agreement, but you cannot have a discussion unless that sense that you can trust the other side is there. And that is difficult, and that is something that I really feel that both Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Sergeyevich deserve so much credit for, is they allowed each other to show, and they did get to trust each other, and the world was better off for it. But once trust is gone, it's very hard to get it back. That's where culture comes in.
No, well, when they came to Geneva, Gorbachev and Reagan, I think, had really a lot of ideological baggage, and including some, frankly, ridiculous misconceptions about the other side. Gorbachev about life in America, Reagan about some aspects of Russia and the Soviet Union. And quite a few people on both sides worked perhaps to reinforce those misconceptions, and quite a few people worked to help them to overcome those misconceptions. And you have to do it carefully, because you have to know how to talk to. One of the things you learn, as I said, is they are human beings. And I think some of us were able to help Mikhail Sergeyevich Gorbachev to get a better idea of America, of the West. And of course, he has a quick mind, and he is he has a quick mind. He likes to learn, so that helped too.
May I just say one more thing about Ronald Reagan here, is Vice President Bush at his funeral said the words that I actually, of all that was said there, that I always remember. He said he never turned an adversary into an enemy. And that is so important.
Good afternoon. My name is Rudy Gonzalez, and I'm hoping to teach business English in Russia later on this year. My question is a current times question with education between defunding of Fulbright, let's say $30 million in defunding of Title VIII, and also just recently, I believe, Russia suspending operations of American consuls in Russia. So I wonder if, this is for anybody on the panel, if you see this as a temporary setback or more of a prolonged problem that can only be solved with interdependence economically and politically at the highest levels. Thank you.
Thank you.
It is ironic that just at the time when we need everybody who understands that part of the world, Title VIII, as you mentioned, and several other programs have fallen on hard times. I think historically, funding tends to follow problems. So recently, there's been a lot of funding for programs about the Middle East. And I think funding will come back. It's just there's a bit of a lag. But I think recent events have shown us all that it's at our peril that we cease to give proper attention to that part of the world.
I'm Dmitry Zareshnik, whom you saw on several of those slides, and Pavel pointed to me. I don't think anybody really knows. Anyway, Pavel and I worked together. I worked as President Reagan's interpreter during those meetings. So my question is specifically to Pavel, I think. Recently, there was a Russian news clip when events began to develop in Kiev, even before the Crimea, which showed Reagan, and I think you were there with him. I mean, Gorbachev. And I think you were there with him. And Gorbachev said there were too many Western advisors in Kiev, and you'd have to use a bulldozer to take them all out. Leave the Ukrainian people to their own, on their own to decide their own fate. So my question is now, if you're at liberty to speak for Gorbachev, what is his view of what has transpired there?
Well, he has been saying that it's very unfortunate that Ukraine has become a kind of a subject of a tug-of-war between the West and Russia, particularly the European Union and Russia. There is at least a trilateral 3 sides, perhaps more, process of discussing the future of Ukraine's associations with the European Union and Russia. He, of course, wants Ukraine to be close to Russia. This is totally understandable. And unfortunately, such a process did not happen. And that's one of the reasons. There are many reasons, but that's one of the reasons of the kind of escalation of unpleasantness, let's put it this way, that we are seeing in Ukraine. So yes, he was annoyed by the fact that so many Westerners came to the Maidan, came to Kiev when those events started. He believed and still believes that there can be a process that will allow Ukraine to, to make its choices, but, as a Russian, as a former president of the Soviet Union, he wants those choices to include very close cooperation with Russia. To me, that's totally understandable.
Eric?
Hi, Eric Lohr, American University. I teach in the history department. I just wanted to say a word, but we learned a great deal about Ronald Reagan and his role in the end of the Cold War today. And it's kind of ironic that in the last 25 years, whenever U.S.-Russian relations are discussed and Ronald Reagan's legacy is brought up, it's his uncompromising will in the sense that he was anti-communist, he was uncompromising, he took the risk to promote SDI, Star Wars. And it's that side of his character that is most often mentioned in political debates about U.S.-Russian relations. You often hear, Ronald Reagan wouldn't have done that if we're talking about compromise. And there couldn't have been a more opposite message delivered today, I think. And I was just wondering if you would like to comment on that. I mean, the risks he took were often with his own advisors, going against his own party, going against his own previous views.
Well, my worm's eye view here, having seen him, is, first of all, paramount in Ronald Reagan's mind, and it became stronger after the assassination attempt. He said then to many people that he felt that the rest of his days belonged to God, and that whatever time he had, he was, I can tell you, passionate is the word, about getting rid of nuclear weapons. I asked him once, I was shy, I didn't ask him questions like a reporter. I knew I wasn't a reporter. I was there to tell him what he wanted to know, but once I couldn't resist saying, but Mr. President, what do you want from the Russians anyway? And he said, I want to get rid of those atomic weapons, every one. He believed that, and if you read his story, you will see, because I think this, what you're talking about is kind of half-truths. First of all, he started out as a Democrat. Secondly, he was not uncompromising. He listened very carefully and looked very hard to see what could be done. He was, and that's what I said right away in my book, I'm not that I was not judging, nor did I know about all the Reagan administration, but only about the side of Reagan that I saw. And he, in that side, he was a very strongly motivated peacemaker. And I think he is not appreciated enough for that. And one of the reasons he was able to do what he was is because he really was a modest and a humble man, not always tossing American might around, but really ready to hear and to think about the other person. I'll tell you, Pavel, that he told me something very, I thought, delightful. He was very hurt when his letters about Danilov, were returned. I'm sure not by Mr. Gorbachev, but very bitter, and because he'd given his own word that these were, that he wasn't. And then I was with him, and this was such a human moment. He looked at me and he said, "Well, they're calling me a wimp now, the right. I'm not a wimp about communism. Do you think I'm a wimp?" I said, "No." And then he said, "But Gorbachev, I really thought he liked me." And he said, I thought, And I don't think it was a snow job, he said. I think he liked me. And of course, he believes all those things, but how else could he behave? He was brought up that way. And that's verbatim from the president.
It's interesting, yeah.
And that is a human side. So I don't think I think that these things about Reagan, this man who was multi-sided, a complicated person, and I think he rather liked being denigrated, except about acting, because it permitted him to be silent and to do what he wanted to do when his advisors were not with him. Listen, there would have been no Geneva Agreement. There would have been no Geneva if his advisors had been listened to. And he insisted. So I think honestly, not that my book is so spectacular, there's lots of other books, but I did get a sort of a look at him privately that I think is the true man, and I respected him very much.
So did I.
Yes.
No, I mean, everything she says, but seeing him day to day the way I did, I came away with enormous respect for this man and saw him not as an ideologue or someone so extreme. He was pragmatic, actually. He was much different from what the press thought, and a lot of the press.
And what many hardline Republicans seem to be making him out
Now
to
they're
be
using
now
that.
in-
I don't know where they get this, and sometimes I feel like writing an article myself.
All right, we have time for one more question. Very short, please.
Ralph Winnie, I work with the Eurasia Center, and I studied international law and Russian language at Moscow State University in the late 90s. My question is the role of Ted Turner in the promotion of cultural diplomacy during the mid-80s. He was a strong proponent of pushing the Goodwill Games in 1986 and had interactions with both Reagan and Gorbachev. Your thoughts?
Well, Gorbachev liked Ted Turner a lot, and they are still very good friends. They meet from time to time, actually quite often. So I think it's also this that helped. And I don't know how really influential he was on the US side, but definitely the rapport, the human rapport that developed between Gorbachev and Ted Turner was really very important. And I'm not surprised that they have continued to be friends. The Goodwill Games, of course, were an attempt to put an end to that cycle of boycotts. And it was, I think, an excellent idea. I don't know whether this qualifies as cultural exchanges, but definitely it was a good idea.
Yeah. Then we have a quick moment for one last question. Agina.
Alina Israeli at American University. My question is to Mr. Evans and Mr. Palashchenko. You both are against the use of the word war. However, Mr. Zhirinovsky lately, a little bit before the Crimea affair, in January, went on national television and was talking about the war that has been going on since 1991 against Russia. And this is the new message that he is putting out of the information war. And Russia is a besieged country and everybody is against her. What can you answer Mr. Zhirinovsky?
Well, I'm not in the habit of, disputing Zhirinovsky. He's a clown. He is someone who does reflect certain misconceptions and a lot of stupidity and ridiculousness that does exist in the Russian society. It is unfortunate that recent events have brought to the surface things like this, and also some other stupid people who put out this kind of line.
You said it, not me. Thank you.
Yeah. What I'm saying is that I don't see why we should pay too much attention to Zhirinovsky, other than he does reflect certain things that do exist in the Russian society. There has been, unfortunately, a rise in anti-American feeling. some of it for objective reasons, as we like to say, some of it because of propaganda, because unfortunately there has been not the kind of thing that you are saying, but some perhaps milder but similar things in some of the programs on Russian television, on the principal channels of the Russian television. I think what we should be thinking about is not this, but how to get over it, how to, despite what is happening, find a way to bring our countries back together on track to a normal relationship. That would be a first step, and from a normal relationship to a better relationship. Zhirinovsky is not our ally on this.
No,
That I'm sure.
He has a lot of followers. That's the reason I asked.
Well, thank you very much, everyone. Unfortunately, we are out of time. You will have more of an opportunity to ask the panelists questions in person at our magnificent reception. Thanks to Susan Lehrman's generosity in supporting our program, bringing all of us together. It's in the Katzen Rotunda. Please follow the hallway, and we'll see you all there.